record.
Okay.
Hi, Miranda. Okay.
Hi. So how have y'all been doing in this virtual platform? Has it been a hot mess or has it been good?
Hot mess, yeah.
Really? Oh, man.
It's okay. We'll get through it.
One day at a time.
It's just been like awkward, yeah. It's just a little awkward, like having to go online and like do a discussion board instead of just like talking in class, and like it's just weird.
Yeah. It's a lot more work, the online environment. Yeah. I'm teaching an online class, a graduate studies class. And yeah, the discussion boards, it's literally like writing a mini paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, so I empathize with y'all in this period. So
yeah, so we are in Carvin Isoon's capstone class. We're all journalism majors, I think, as far as I'm sure. And yeah, so we started this with intentions of hopefully finishing our like video and like talking to as many people as we could on campus. We had been in contact with a lot of people, but unfortunately, like with this situation, we're resulting to like things like this. So yeah, we appreciate you agreeing. But yeah, we were just gonna ask you some questions about your position and how you've been experiencing your new position as well. So yeah. Sure. Okay, hold on 1 second. So let me get to my question. Okay, so the first question that I have is, what does being a CDO mean to you?
Good question. So, okay, how do I answer? I would say Chief Diversity Officer is really someone who helps the college, or any business really, streamline their equity, diversity, and inclusion goals for the entire campus, right? So it's someone who has the ability to engage a wide variety of audiences. So someone who's good with people, but someone who's also administratively strong, because part of the role is also about holding different sectors of the campus accountability, but also someone who's able to create partnerships across the college. So being a CDO, I mean, it's a really important role because it's really about collaboration and collaboration around illuminating the value added that diversity brings to a campus environment. So it's really about seeing people for who they are and how they add value to the campus community. I think that's a really important and distinct role, because everybody, depending on who you are from whatever walk of life, you come into a college environment, you want to feel valued, you want to feel like you belong, you want to feel like you matter. So whether it's in your classroom, in your rest hall, you know, in student activities or whatever clubs and organizations, athletics, etc., you want to feel like you matter and that your presence there in whatever environment and spaces is being treated as such, right? So being a CDO is really about community building in its truest form, right? Mm-hmm. And getting people, engaging with people to allow them to see the value that the diversity brings to their spaces within the college.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
So on the topic of race and diversity, what do you think is Brockport's #1 issue?
So, okay, so when I think about diversity, diversity is more than just race, right? It can come to a consensus that it is more than just race. But one of the things, again, as a graduate of Brockport, I attended Brockport back in 94, graduated in 99. And some of the challenges that I hear that some of my students are facing currently were some of the things that I dealt with as a student. So in terms of Brockport's challenges, but the interesting thing is that even though that there were challenges when I was a student. I think for me, what was different was my ability to still engage in the college environment, that I still felt like my faculty members cared about me as an individual. I still was able to walk into a particular office and feel valued, even though there were pockets of racial bias and tension happening when I was a student. What I hear from students, though, is that they don't feel that sense of validation and belonging, and they feel dismissed oftentimes or not seen, which I think it's a problem, because again, like I mentioned before, part of the role of a CDO, or even just a campus, in terms of thinking about diversity in general, embracing diversity in general, is to make sure that folks feel valid and they feel that sense of belonging. I don't think that the issues that Brockport is having around racial diversity, or just diversity in general, is that different from what other campuses are experiencing around the topic, right? As you do your own research, you'll know that most college campuses are becoming way more diverse than they were when I was in school. Students who are coming to college are much more ready to engage in diverse conversations than they were when I was in school, right? But I think what's happening is that you see students, the type of students are changing, but the college hasn't caught up to that type of rapid change that our students are bringing and wanting to engage in those difficult conversations. So I think the challenge is both a generational challenge, as well as a challenge around clear expectations for the entire campus about what's acceptable and what's not, right? So again, we know that Brockport is not perfect by any means, but if there are issues around bias, if a student is feeling like, their roommate or somebody on their floor in their building is engaged in highly racialized, inappropriate behavior, then what do we do with that, right? And to me, since I've been in this position for a short amount of time, there hasn't really been any clear overarching expectations around what that means for our campus. I think departments have specific goals and things that they do to try to minimize bias, but there's not necessarily an institutional kind of party. Y'all know, you guys are what, seniors and juniors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like when you go into a Target, right? You walk into that store and there's a sense of, employees are supposed to do a certain thing. They're supposed to act a certain way if something's not on the shelf or somebody asks a question, right? Never once do you walk into a Target, maybe I haven't, and where an employee is actually dismissed your question or doesn't ask you or are following you around the store, that kinds of things. Even though we know pockets of those things happen, but from a broad perspective, you walk into that store and you feel like, oh, I want to hang out in Target all the time. It's so great. It's a positive shopping experience. I want to go back, right? And, again, I'm simplifying that, but in a college environment, when issues of race and gender and all these things come to play and there's unrest, what oftentimes happens is that there's not a really cohesive response around that sense of belonging, right? So pockets of people feel like, I'm not welcome in this space, so I'm gonna go over here. Like, the girl over in the the cooking aisle is great, but the cashier is like horrible, right? So, but what I think colleges need to try to do is to really come up with a much more holistic response instead of these pockets of response, because I think that sets the tone for how employees, how staff, how faculty engage with their students, as well as deal with issues when they arise, right? So part of it is, I think, again, kind of like the leadership kinds of things, then process in terms of making sure that when issues do come up, that it's not delayed, that there's a true resolution for that, and not just the punitive kinds of things, right? Because, this, y'all read the Code of Student Conduct, and there are some clear expectations about how students are supposed to behave. But, most students aren't really reading those until they actually are in that process. But, I think oftentimes it's the additional stuff. So where's their training happening? Where's their conversations around these topics? Where do students get to voice their concerns to whomever without feeling like they're going to be retaliated against, right? Without feeling like they can't say. So I think that's some of the things that I'm often concerned about, but I'm attuned to, in terms of, while there might be pockets of departments that might be doing some great work around diversity, it hasn't been institutionalized. So you have pockets of departments and spaces on campus that are still operating in that's against Brockport values. So that's a long answer, but hopefully it makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
I kind of just want to backtrack a little, but you mentioned that you previously attended college at Brockport,
Mm-hmm.
and that there were similarities and even differences too. Can you elaborate more on that? And do you see this moment, the firing of Dr. Archie, as a pivotal moment for Brockport in changing race, diversity, and inclusion?
So that's a two-part question. So I'll answer the first part in that. So when I was a student, I was super involved. I was one of those students who was just involved with a whole lot of different things by default, right? So I had a work study position in the Vice President for Student Affairs office. So that was really cool. And she was a great lady and allowed me to be a peer mentor for her class, and kind of encouraged me to be involved in different aspects of campus life. And I was exposed to engaging with a lot of different departments and folks that didn't look like me, in for the most part, positive experiences, right? So, but I lived in, which hall did I live in? I lived at the time in Briggs Hall. If y'all one of the high rises, those hallways are pretty small. They're like 4 rooms, and a lot of the folks on the floor was pretty. They were pretty nice, but it was majority white. So I lived in a room with 5 other white women, and 2 of them I knew pretty well from my freshman year. So we agreed to all live together, and sometimes you get placed with people and you're like, hope it works out, right? So one of the women that I lived with, she was openly racist, like to the point where, using the N-word and talking under her breath and just doing a lot of that, kind of like being verbally abusive racially. And at the time, when you're young, you don't know, like you're just hoping that, man, I'm just trying to go to class. I don't need to deal with this when I come back to my room. But it got to a point where the girls in the room, we all kind of sat around oftentimes and was just like talking about how that was making us feel, how that was creating a weird dynamic in the room. What are we going to do about it? Because again, you can't kick anybody, out of their space. They're paying that too. So, so we had some interesting and tough conversations around how that was making me feel, how my friends felt when they came to the space, how the other women in the room, who were, again, all majority white, was creating that weird dynamic. And so there were some interesting, really difficult conversations at the time, as you can imagine. And there was one instance where my friends, again, my friends were pretty open to having these tough conversations, right? So there was one instance where I can recall, like it was yesterday, one of my friends, this person was saying some really horrible things. And again, we're trying to understand, and everyone's trying to understand. But this person was being so disrespectful that one of my friends got so angry, and they got into like a physical fight. They got into a physical fight, and that incident, just kind of changed the whole dynamic of what our experience was like. So, you know, she ended up moving out and all these different things kind of escalated. But even before that, I think what was good is that I had an RA who was pretty open to us having those conversations on the floor. And because we had a good kind of community feel and we kind of respected each other, the conversations were good. Because again, a lot of times you hear from students, you know, I never lived with somebody who was Black, or I never lived with somebody who lived or from New York City, or whatever, you know, the case may be. So this was an opportunity for us to both learn about each other and whatever. So again, you know, back in the 90s when I went to school, you know, race wasn't talked about like it's now, right? In terms of what's happening in the world. But I think, you know, I think that situation really, you know, helped shape, I think, my professional career, in the sense that, you know, being able to see people eye to eye and come to that space is difficult, because again, part of it is you're being vulnerable to even engage and hear people have these interesting thoughts about who they think you are based on your race, right? Like, you know, some folks have some really bizarre ideas about what that is, and hearing that out loud, and people are brave enough to say that out loud could be shocking. So I think situations like that was happening when I was in school, right? But I don't know if we had a process. I don't remember us having a process beyond the RA and the RD for dealing with stuff like that from an institutional standpoint, right? But now, today, 2020, there's so many different resources, right? You have campus police who's, you know, investigating stuff like this. You have the student conduct who is also investigates and adjudicate cases like this. You also have the bias report system that students can, you know, report things right away. And there's folks who are sitting around table talking about that, investigating, and et cetera. So there's so much more resources available to students now than when I was in school. I mean, I think that incident just happened and folks kind of like forgot about it the next day, or was just, you know, blocked it out of their mind and just hope that, you know, they can move on with their college career. We never reported it to anybody. I think people were, I mean, again, a fight, right? Nobody wanted to be kicked out of school. So there was that, you know, so the dynamics, again, back then to now is different. But I think what for me was important that I didn't move out. I stayed living there with the girls, and, you know, we, you know, made the best of a really horrible situation. But a lot of it, we took it upon ourselves to learn about each other in a different way. So I don't know if that kind of thing is happening in the halls. My hope is that it is, right? But because one of the things that I've come to understand is that policy can only do so much. Policy can only do so much, right? So we have all these resources that are aimed towards investigating and adjudicating cases around racial bias, et cetera. But at the end of the day, we are all human. So how you engage with people still matters even after that case is resolved, right? So, and again, part of that is feeling comfortable within the environment for you, allowing you to do that. So that's the one part of your question. And the second part of your question was around the firing of Dr. Archie. So ask that again so I can make sure
So do you see this as a pivotal moment for Brockport in regards to race, diversity, and inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you have to hear and understand what students are saying beyond the firing, right? So yes, the firing was very shocking and it hurt the campus, but as I go through and I've been listening to different student groups and faculty talk about what it means for them to see the firing of Dr. Archie, there's a lot of things underneath that, right? So, and that says to me that, you know, what has the college been doing even prior to Dr. Archie even appointment and termination. I don't know if that's the right word, but again, he's no longer with the college, right? So what's been happening prior to that in terms of addressing a lot of the concerns that faculty and students, because again, they didn't just come out of the blue, right? So I think the fact that Dr. Archie is no longer here it's been illuminating to hear what some of the consistent problems has been for some folks around equity, diversity, inclusion. And I think, I don't think opportunity is the word, but it's definitely a wake-up call for the college to really, truly address these concerns in a much more systematic way. Like I mentioned before, right? There are pockets of departments who do really great with all of their students, and students feel welcome and included, and they love Brockport, but they only love that one department. But, you know, again, do they feel that same way about the entire campus? And you know, if you ask students, yeah, no, I don't like going here because of this. I don't like going to this space because of this. So I don't go talk to this individual because of this, right? So from a systematic point of view, there's still pockets, there's still things that the college needs to do in order to not be in a similar situation like that we're in right now, right? So I hope that answers your question.
So what do you hope to accomplish while you're in this position, regardless of how long it is?
Yeah, so great question. As the interim, so there are some key things that I have been spending my time doing in order to help the college move to a much more systemic response, right? So I think part of that is really understanding the institutional vision around equity, diversity, inclusion. Not my vision, not the Office of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion vision, but again, systemically, what's our goal? What are we trying to do? And how does that get filtered down to all of the departments and our student engagement, right? So that's one thing that I'm working with college leadership on. Another thing is really trying to systematize and operationalize what the goals are that's been identified, right? So if we say that, for example, one of the goals is to make sure that departments or the college in general is creating a much more positive climate for all students around equity, diversity, inclusion, right? That's a very broad goal. So, but what does that mean for academic affairs, right? There's many departments in academic affairs, as y'all know, journalism is one. So what are they doing around creating a positive climate for people? Does people even know what that means? What does that look like? I always go back to my graduate school kind of colloquium, like what does something look like, feel like, and sound like? So when we say a positive climate, what do we mean by that? What do we want students to come out with that experience like? So trying to operationalize what these goals may look like so people can, you know, have some tangible things to latch onto. I think one of the things that's been missing from the systemic structure is consistently hearing from students about what's going well and what's not going well, right? So the initial creating that student advisory board was a critical piece in that to try to close that gap, right? So even though we have the Brockport student government, and they also have a focus on equity and culture within BSG, that's oftentimes wrapped up in programs, right? So, and programs is very different than process. It's different than procedures, guideline, policy, those kind of bigger kinds of things. So my goal is to, with the Student Advisory Board, is to get cabinet members, college leadership, folks who sit at the table in terms of they can make decisions about what life is like on campus for faculty, staff, and students. Talk to students. I mean, again, my student affairs background comes in handy with this because oftentimes I sit in a lot of meetings, and whether we're talking about college transportation or food option or even some of this COVID stuff, you know, I'm always like, okay, have we talked to students about this? What are students saying about XYZ? You know, have we vetted this whatever idea from students? So making sure that whatever direction the college goes or in their equity, diversity, and inclusion goals, that there's a constant line to students, both from various facets of the college, you know, so they can hear from students, right? So the advisory board right now is made up of 15 students. We have graduate students, we have undergraduate students, we have older students, we have students with disability, we have students who identify as LGBTQIA. So it's a very broad group, which is great. So we're not, and plus one of the things that we really tried to do was to make sure that we weren't tapping into the same student leaders that we always do, right? So we know that those student leaders are super busy and they're doing amazing things in the multiple organizations that they're involved in, but we wanted to make sure that, yeah, these students were involved, but they weren't kind of like a central core group of students that we typically pull information from. So the advisory board is going to be important for us to operationalize. It's going to be interesting during this COVID period how we use them. There's a meeting with them coming up this week, and so it'll be nice to kind of hear from them how they want to continue out the semester, but I'm excited to at least get that group up and running. Part of it too is my role is to continue to support some of the programs and initiatives coming out of OEDI. You know, again, just because Dr. Archie is not there doesn't mean the programs can't continue, right? So there is a program coordinator, Dr. Kira Duckworth, that I meet with regularly. There's 2 other graduate fellows that work in the office. And we, you know, meet on a regular basis to kind of talk about, you know, what programmatic goals do we have for the campus? What initiatives do we need to continue to help move the college forward? For example, hiring that recruitment specialist that's in HR is going to be important, because one of the goals of the college is to make sure that the hiring process, that recruitment process, that we're hiring folks who are diverse and can add diversity to our campus. So getting that position filled is going to be important. So, you know, I provide a lot of, it's interesting, I'm just providing right now in the interim a lot of support, accountability, checks and balances with a lot of the departments on campus. So I meet with, obviously I'm on the president's cabinet, which is great, but then I meet with a lot of folks individually to kind of help them streamline their EDI processes a little bit better. And, you know, go from there. I also partner a lot with the SUNY CDO. You know, in the president newsletter, she mentioned that Rodman King from Oswego has been working with the campus. So we meet also on a regular basis to kind of talk about some of much more, again, high level things, because training is critical, right? So oftentimes the feedback that the cabinet's been getting is that the president's cabinet's been getting is around people not feeling that they can trust the leadership, and there's bias there, and you know, those kinds of things. So over the last few weeks, we've been engaging in bias training, which is great. Dr. King has been helping lead the cabinet through a series of stuff. We're also reading the book. Let me show you. Where is it? I just saw it. Oh, here it is. White Frailty. Have y'all read this? Saw this?
No,
Yeah.
that was interesting.
I've seen it. I've seen it around. Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, I haven't read it yet though.
Yeah, so cabinet is reading this, and we're going through a series of training modules and things like that. So there's some, and again, my goal, even within COVID happening, right? My goal is to continually make sure that folks are thinking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. For example, the online platform. Everybody, I mean, it's a challenge for some students to now have classes online. You know, there's some mental health things that we need to be thinking about for our students. You know, students' home life and school life for some folks are different, right? And some of the challenges that comes with that. So I'm working right now with the provost and the bias team, as well as the ODI staff, to push out some resources, some training opportunities for folks to both adhere to ADA kinds of things, like, you know, stuff that folks haven't even been thinking about, but also how do you recognize bias in an online platform, right? I mean, it's easy to, again, you know, right now the college is using Microsoft Teams. I don't know what y'all use for your classes, but not all platforms are created equal, right? So how do you, again, make sure students are feeling like they're able to engage, not feel silence in the online platform? How do faculty members identify or call out things that they see that may not be appropriate, right? For example, you know, you might be holding a meeting, might be holding your class in your bedroom and there's all these interesting posters in your room. You don't care, right? But it might be offensive to somebody who is on the call, right? So how do you, you know, attend to some of the things like that that potentially might come up, right? So trying to equip our faculty with some really awesome training tools to help them be successful, but also working with our students to let them know that we haven't forgotten y'all, and we're trying to find ways to connect. The OEDI office is probably more than likely going to be holding some virtual office hours, virtual cafes with some of our student groups over the next few weeks, just to check in, because again, we're in a pandemic, right? And, you know, I think I told a colleague the other day, I said, man, you know, folks are acting like we're just working from home. And it's really not that, right? And it's not that simple for some of our students who might be challenged in various ways. So so that's some of the things that I'm trying to do in my interim. Part of it as well is to really understand the structure of the OEDI office and thinking about, do we have the resources needed to meet the needs of the campus, right? So again, like I said, it's just the CDO. It's just a CDO, program coordinator, and 2 grad students. You know, if we say that EDI is everybody's business, then what does that look like in practice? And, you know, how does the office support that, right? So, you know, is there an opportunity to add, again, more staff members? Do we need more staff members? Do we need to think about the structure? Is it student facing? Is it faculty staff facing? So all these conversations that I'm having with the president as well as the cabinet members around restructuring or rethinking differently about the place of OEDI on campus in terms of meeting the needs of folks. So I'm busy, it's a little, but.
Right. So I'm in a feminist theory class currently, and this is from Black Feminist Thought by Patricia Collins. And when I read these quotes, yes. Yeah, so when I read these quotes, they really stood out to me, and it made me feel a little bit like this is, in my opinion, it felt similar to what's going on at Brockport. I'm just interested to hear what you think about this.
Mm-hmm.
It says, Black professional women are often in high visibility positions, which require them to serve white superiors while quieting the natives. Black women professionals are also expected to fix systems which are in crisis due to underfunding, infrastructure deterioration, and demoralized staff.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I you know, when I first took the position, I reminded people, I'm just like, you think of the Allen Hall, right? And Allen built the building of at least 7 floors. And in that 7th floor, on all 7 floors of Allen, I mean, I am the only one in a senior level position on campus. Just think about that for a minute, right? And so that comes with many interesting challenges and opportunities, right? So, but one of the things that I also try to remind folks too is that I'm not a token, right? So I chose to step into the interim role because my love for Brockport, right? I went here as a student. My experience was pretty positive for the most part, and I can point to all of the faculty and staff, most of who didn't look like me, who supported me through my undergraduate career and in my graduate profession, right? So I tell folks is, my voice and how I show up in those spaces matter, but don't assume that it's because I'm a token of some kind, right? But I do think that faculty and staff of color on predominantly white campuses have a difficult time balancing some of the cultural pressures of supporting students, but also being at work or in an environment that doesn't always see the value in that, right? So because the numbers are so small, I talk to faculty all the time, faculty and staff all the time, and it's not that folks don't want to support students of color, et cetera, but it's a need because students aren't getting it in those other spaces, right? So being able to, again, validate that mentoring is important and that coaching is important for our students of color or underrepresented student communities needs to be central to understanding how to support students holistically, right? So it's really it shouldn't be the job of just our underrepresented faculty and staff doing that work. And if they are, then, the college needs to do some things differently, right? So yes, there's challenges with being the only one, but I've been in the field a long time, so somebody younger might answer it differently, but I'm not really one to sugarcoat or hold back. I really try to speak from I really try to assume positive intent when it comes to this work, but I also really try to speak directly to the issues, right? I try not to make it all personal and all this other stuff, but I really just try to make sure that folks are understanding why the college is in the situation that they're in, right? And, sometimes that's not always great to hear, right? I mean, it's like, telling somebody, like, I think even in this book, I think they talk about, how do you talk about racism without feeling like a racist? I mean, just because we're talking about equity, diversity, inclusion, and some of the challenges that we're having, doesn't mean that I'm saying that you're a racist, okay? Right, so the folks on the receiving end of that, which is usually, again, my majority white colleagues, at some point have to come to terms with, Brockport is not perfect. Our students are telling us that these are the things that are problematic in their experience. That by all means doesn't mean that they're saying that you as an individual is racist. What they're saying is that there are structures in place that are preventing them from being successful as they should be, right? So, and those two things are different, but oftentimes when, we talk about race or we bring up race, oftentimes folks associate that in a personal way, thinking that they're racist. So, and those are interesting conversations and balance, interesting balance. But I do agree with Patricia Hill Collins in that, oftentimes faculty and staff of color, Black women, are oftentimes used in ways that's problematic.
So I have a question just about, since you're new to the position, how are you going to gain the trust of your students and build that relationship with them? Because many of us, like, you know,
You're breaking up a little bit, Miranda.
we don't, right? So we're just, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Hello?
Hello? Okay, sorry. My Wi-Fi is terrible.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, how do you plan on gaining the trust of the students and building that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important question. And the part of my regular job, my other position at being an AVP for student affairs had allowed me to already started building relationships with students. So, you know, a lot of the areas within my supervision is, you know, athletics, student activities, community development, Hazen Center for Integrated Care, BSG, et cetera. So I was already engaged with students in various ways, right? So whether, you know, I'm attending an athletic events and getting to know the athletes, whether I'm showing up at some of the tabling that's happening in the union, going to Club Fest and some of those other big programs and actually talking to students and getting to know students. I think those are important activities to do. Since I've been in the position, I've actually I've attended a few cultural council meetings, which is really great. I have, you know, had one-on-one conversations with, you know, a variety of different students, et cetera. So I think students see me as visible. I also am on social media. You know, if y'all don't follow me now. So as I, you know, go around different campus events and different things, and I interact with students, I think in the fall semester, I started doing kind of like a student org spotlight on my Instagram page. That got a little diverted once I got pulled into a whole bunch of different meetings with the CDO stuff. But I think forming a relationship with students is critically important, right? So I've only been here, what, 8-9 months now? So, and then again, COVID has really kind of put a wrench in some of the stuff, but I've always, you know, tried to walk through the union at least once, twice a week. I'm on campus pretty late in the evening, so I try to attend different events. But I think, you know, having those conversations with students and getting to know them is important, and that's already part of my kind of what I already do. So if there are other opportunities, let me know, because I'm always interested in connecting with students.
What's the process like working alongside President MacPherson? As you said, like earlier, that you've only been here for 9 months.
Yeah, and I've only been on cabinet for a short amount of time, right? So I've only, let's see, we're in April. Yeah, so I've been on cabinet probably since in February, I think. That's when Dr. Archie left. So it really hasn't been that long. But it's been really cool getting to know her. It's interesting because as an AVP, my interactions with her was already there, right? So a lot of it, you know, these cross partnerships and things happen across the division. So we've interacted at various things. But it's different now I have 2 supervisors you know, so, but it's been good getting to work with her. I think her heart's in the right place. I think she's committed. She's very passionate about making sure that Brockport gets it right this time. So that's always music to my ear, because it makes my job a little bit easier when you don't have to convince people what the right thing to do is. I think she already knows what the right thing to do is, and she's trying to use all the trainings and the lessons and the conversations that both I'm having as well as Dr. King is having with her to move the college in a positive direction. So it's been good. I mean, again, like being thrown, not being, thrown, having to assume the interim role in such a heated time, you know, the first few weeks and of with all the protests and things happening on campus, we were just responding, just being very kind of reactive to what was going on. I think now we're in a better position to be much more proactive. So, and that's how I work. I really like to be proactive and think about strategically both the short term and kind of the long term implications of the stuff. So, and she understands that, and I think we're in a good place. So it's been good working with her.
So what tactics have you found the most and the least effective in reaching your student audiences?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges is communication, right? We have here, meaning at Brockport, is communication, because we seem to communicate to students only in kind of one way, right? Those emails that the president sent out, she's kind of like the only one who reports out on equity, diversity, inclusion, and really nobody else in the college really reports on this stuff, which is not good. I'm very big into marketing. I'm very big into showcasing the college in a way that makes sense. Because I was talking to the admissions office the other day, and I'm just like, Brockport, there's a lot of good pockets of things that are happening at the college around equity, diversity, inclusion, and you should be able to, from the admission standpoint, you should be able to talk about that, right? So you shouldn't be able, you shouldn't have to like go, find those. It shouldn't be hidden, right? And I think a lot of the things that we are doing or have done is kind of hidden a little bit. So I think our challenge really is marketing and getting ahead of some of this stuff, because it's like, there's some good strategies and things that are going on, but I'm just like, nobody knows. And the only reason why they may find out is through the president newsletter, which I know some students don't read. Right? So I think we just need to come up with different platforms for us to communicate out to students. Because as you all know, some of the social media stuff, you only, click on something that's of interest. But I think we just need to have a much more, we need to have a different strategy around communicating with students, and email is not always the best option. I think one of the things that when I first got here, the president did this pizza with the president, where she invited regular students, whatever, to come over to her house, have pizza dinner, and just kind of talk about their experience widely. But that's not really promoted. Like, nobody knows she does that. Like,
I didn't know that until now.
Yeah, but apparently it's been a thing, right? And I'm just like, those are some really cool things that we could do and market around so folks know and see her around campus, because that's one way to, I think, engage her and other cabinet members in not in an office kind of setting, but in a much more relaxed setting. I think it's really good. I do think, again, attending events, students need to see me out and about. They need to feel like I am accessible. And if I stay in my office the whole time, then that's no good. No one's going to want to come. I think oftentimes folks feel like students should come and meet with me. Students should come in. It's like, no, you have to really go out and do outreach to students. So I've been thinking really about, so I do these pop-ins to my areas, especially on the student affairs side. So I have one-on-one with my directors all the time. And oftentimes I really try to challenge myself not to have it in my office, right? So it forces me to go on a different side of campus, right? So finding different spaces to have one-on-one meetings and different things like that. And, again, using social media differently, being more creative in that space, I think is important. So, other questions?
Miranda, do you have another question?
I asked all of my questions. Do you guys have any?
Barry, do you have anything?
Again, backtrack. But do you feel like President MacPherson's perspective of the story has been misinterpreted? And do you feel like you yourself have been and everything?
Perspective of in what? Say more about that.
From what I've realized is that there's like people want to like make sides to this, you know, there's Dr. Archie's side, President MacPherson's side. Like, how do you see this, and how do you, like, in my perspective, like, do you think people are misinterpreting like what's going on? And like, from what I hear is that President MacPherson, like, I've sat in on the meetings when she was meeting with students.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like she's not listening, or that, you know, they're like robotic answers, and like from what I realized, it seems like they're misinterpreting her based off of like what she's saying and how she's interacting.
Yeah, you know, it's such a difficult situation because the personnel piece of all this is really tricky, right? So one of the things I think that oftentimes students aren't privy to, maybe even staff or faculty, is that president, even though the president is the president of Brockport, she also has a boss. She also has, Brockport has a board of trustees. SUNY has a board of trustees that we all as leadership answer to. And there are certain things that the president can't say or engage in that is a violation of rules and policies and all this other stuff. So, you know, I think I've been in meetings with her where people have asked, you know, why did you fire Dr. Archie? Did you fire him for blah, 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 blah? And I know her standard answer is, I am not at liberty to discuss that. I'm not at liberty. And that can really be seen as out of touch, like you're not hearing me, like I want to know. And she's been in I think a really tough spot in terms of allowing folks to understand kind of where the college is going, but also being able to respond to why did you make that decision. And I think because she can't really say specifically why she made that decision, it's hard for people to understand where we're going forward, right? So I don't know if it's a misinterpretation, but I think there is some misunderstanding around what the role of the president is. So again, even though, yeah, she gets to make decisions about who fired, who gets, you know, to stay and all that sort of stuff, it's way more complex than that. It's not as easy as that. So I don't know if folks, but one of the things too is that as leaders, whatever decision we make, we have to be held accountable, right? So, and I think she knows that and understands that, you know, people still want answers and want to know what all this means for them, because from their point of view, from the outside of looking in, Dr. Archie did what he needed to do and to support students and all these different kinds of things, right? So I think it's just a hard balance, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong way to answer that. But I do know there's certain things that she's not at liberty to say, and that can come across as her being out of touch. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's all I had as well. So thank you for talking. Your answers were great. So yes, everything was good. You said everything you needed to say, so that was awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Well, let me know how your project ends up. Hopefully you guys get an A.
Thank you. We'll figure something out.
Right. Awesome. Okay. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.